Well, thank you so much for all those who have been able to share in that reading today. It's great to have so many different faces on the screen and be able to listen to you as you've read through Isaiah chapter 40. And if you have a Bible, we're going to continue going through our series through Isaiah. And if you had it and you open up to Isaiah chapter 40, that would be helpful for you as well. Well, it's been a crazy week, hasn't it? These freezing temperatures followed by a massive storm with driving rain and wild winds, power outages, trees falling around everywhere. How did you experience it in your neighbourhood? In our neighbourhood, many people lost power like ourselves, but fortunately for myself, we didn't suffer much tree damage, but across our street there are many trees down in our local area. In our household, though, one of the things that was kind of a surprising outcome of Thursday night was that I now know that our smoke alarms work very well. There must be some feature in the modern smoke alarm that when there is no power, it sets them off. I suppose that's good to know if you have a fire and the power is cut off, that the smoke alarm will go off and they will sound. It's not so good when there's not a fire and they sound off. And what a sound it is. Ear-piercing sound it is. It's even more ear-piercing at 12:30 a.m. It wakes you. Did yours go off? Ours did. First they went off at 12:30 until I climbed on a stepladder and hit the hush button with a broom handle. Then they went off again at 12:40 and again at 12:50. And finally at 1 a.m. when they went off for the fourth time, I walked out into the wet, cold darkness, jumped over the puddles that had bloomed beside my house, grabbed a ladder. Our smoke alarms are on the roof and we've got relatively high ceilings. And in the darkness, spotlighted by Narelle's phone, tried to remove the batteries from every smoke alarm in our house. At the end, I got to say, I just wanted to rest. I just wanted to get back into a warm bed. You know, smoke alarms can save your life. But frankly, after they had sounded again and again and again and again, I just wanted some release. I wanted some relief. Do you know how that feels? You want some peace. Whether it's literal peace or metaphoric peace, it doesn't matter. I wanted to be in a warm bed, in peace and comfort. You know, as we've been journeying through the book of Isaiah and seeing the experience of the nation of Israel during that time, I believe there was a time when the people of Israel had kind of the smoke alarm of judgment ringing in their ears again and again, this life-saving smoke alarm. But eventually they needed relief. They needed some peace. They needed what we read about in Isaiah chapter 40. Comfort, comfort my people, says your God. Comfort, comfort my people, says your God. You know, Isaiah chapter 40 is almost like a large exhale at the end of 39 chapters of predominantly gloomy messages. It marks a new section as we move from this word of judgment and gloom and doom to now a time of hope and comfort. Let me ask you today, do you know God as a God of comfort? It's often an experience for many of us that we build an understanding of God that tends to be kind of one-dimensional. For some, that is an image of God as a God of judgment. You know what I'm talking about, the judicial God with a beard sitting in a courtroom, gavel in hand, banging it, announcing guilty or not guilty. And for many people in our world, that's a common picture of God. It's also a picture that many people have of the church, a picture of judgment. And frankly, it's the dominant message of the first 39 chapters of Isaiah. God is pictured as a holy God, perfect. Sin is an affront to a holy God. It's offensive and it will be judged. And the people of Israel had rejected that holy God and lived rebellious lives, the lives that they wanted to live. And And the truth is that they will reap the rewards for their actions. A God of judgment. For others, like to construct a picture of God as a God of love. And I think this is how most of society wants to see who God is. But frankly, also at times, this can be a one-dimensional view. God is a God of love. Love wins. Love is the only thing. And for many people, I myself will determine what that love looks like and how it's lived out. Now, it's very true that God is a God of love. In fact, I believe it's the defining characteristic of God. But many have a narrow understanding of what that love might look like. Love has many different aspects and lived out ideas. There are tensions that exist within it. Love is not feeding my child Coca-Cola and lollies every day. Love will seek the well-being of the person. Love disciplines as well as it invites and forgives and comforts. Now here today, we have another dimension to the picture of God, this multifaceted picture of God, a God of comfort. And I have to say that this is not a way that people usually see God. And I think part of the reason for us is it can be kind of hard to understand comfort as it relates to God. I mean, you think about how you and I might comfort other people. Someone comes home after a hard day. It might have been a spouse, a child, a friend. How do we comfort them? Well, can I get you something? And maybe it's been raining and it's cold outside and we get them something warm to put on, or it's a hot chocolate or fresh clothes or something like that. We physically help them. Think about how we might comfort someone at a funeral. We gently go up beside someone, offer some words of condolence. Maybe we place our arm around their shoulders. When someone is sick, we offer food as practical care. What can I do for you to help you, to comfort you? Maybe we know someone who's been through a relational struggle, a breakup or some other pain. Our comfort is to be there with them, to be present. Maybe it's to offer a listening ear or a shoulder for them to lean on. These are very human expressions of comfort, and it's hard for us, I believe, to wrap our heads around what that means for a God who is also transcendent. How might God be a God of comfort? Well, the people of Israel had desperately sought comfort. For many years before we read the words of Isaiah 40, the people had reaped the results of their rebellion. They had been taken away from their homeland, exiled into a foreign land, taken away from all the things that were familiar to them, all the things that were part of their normal life and experience. They had abandoned God, but He had not forgotten them. A few weeks ago, we read these words from Isaiah chapter 6. In verse 9, it says, "Go and say to this people," listen carefully. So this was Isaiah's message to the people, but frankly, they weren't interested. Watch closely, but learn nothing. They weren't interested. Harden the hearts of these people. And it goes on with some of these ideas repeated. But then in verse 11, it says this, "Then I said," that's Isaiah, they said, "Lord, how long will this go on? How long will this go on?" And this message comes from God, until their towns are empty, their houses are deserted, and the whole country is a wasteland. This is the pain of the experience of this nation. They had reaped the rewards, the consequences of their rebellion, and they were devastated as a people. And so their voices cry out, how long will this go on? Maybe you even know that difficulty in your own life, and you declare that, how long must we endure? Well, Isaiah chapter 40 is the answer to chapter 6. Isaiah chapter 40 is the end of that how long. It is the release from all the pressure that had been built up. Comfort my people, says your God. It's saying the The period of exile will now be over. Exile from God, exile from your homeland. No longer judgment, but comfort. So how does God offer comfort in this time? Well, it's not the same sort of physical presence that we talk about when we often offer comfort to other people. Yes, those physical expressions can come through God's people, but here we see comfort come from the Father heart of God. So follow through with me as we see some of these expressions of comfort. The first thing we can see in verse 2 is the change in tone of the voice of God. Before, it had been a tone of judgment and condemnation coming, but now we read, "Speak tenderly to Jerusalem." Speak tenderly. You know how tone is important, don't you? It's the difference between when we say someone, "What are you doing?" versus "How are you?" Our tone conveys our heart. When you are hurting and upset, you need the voice of comfort, not one that is harsh. Listen to the tone of the voice of God here. For it is a salve for the broken. It is the bandage that binds up the wounds that we have. It's the loving parents that wrap their arms around a disobedient child and speak gently. But it's not only the tone, it's the message. And here at the heart of it is the message. Because the message from God is that hard days are gone. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem. Proclaim to her that her hard service has been completed. The hard service that Isaiah is talking about there is usually applied to like a military service in the midst of warfare. And here's this time where you've been going through these battles, going through this struggle and fight and experience all the time, but now the warfare is over. This time of hard service is complete. In Isaiah chapter 6, if you can recall that number of weeks ago, we talked about how it had the triple holy, holy, holy. Well, now after this hard service comes the double comfort. Comfort, comfort. This is the great release, the gentle voice that time of hard service is now over. That hard service was there for one reason and one reason alone: sin. The sin and rebellious nature of the people had pushed God away, and so they had experienced the consequences of that, the punishment of that. But now it's comfort. Why? Because your sin has been forgiven. Your sin has been pardoned. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem. Proclaim to her that her hard service has been completed. Your sin has been forgiven. You see, sin is what sent the nation into exile. Sin is what has now been pardoned so you can return from exile. You know, that idea of being sent away and coming back home has a dual significance in Isaiah. It has the significance in that it physically happened to the people. They were physically removed from their homeland and taken into a foreign land. And then they were physically taken home from the foreign land back to their homeland. Well, it also represents their spiritual journey. Taken away from God. They'd rebelled and left, but now they returned back to God. You see, the Bible often uses physical images and experiences to convey deeper ideas. When people are in the desert is not just a place without trees and water. When the nation was in exile, they were a long way away from where they were meant to be. But now the great comfort is that they can come home. They can come home because their sin has been forgiven. This is truly the greatest source of comfort for anybody. The release from fear and shame and guilt to come home. And God invites them to do so. And in fact, not only invites them to do so, he makes a way for them to come home. Keep reading along with me as we do today. In verse 3 it says, "Clear the way through the wilderness for the Lord. Make a straight highway through the wasteland for our God. Fill in the valleys, level out the mountains and hills, straighten the curves, smooth out the rough places." See, God is making this way home. They had abandoned him, but he had not rejected them. And now he clears the path for them to come home. You might ask yourself today, how do we put these two seeming competing ideas together? How do we put this past chapters of judgment and condemnation for the sin of Israel? I mean, read the previous chapter in verse 5 and 6 of chapter 39. It says, Isaiah said to Hezekiah, that's one of the kings, "Listen to this message from the Lord of heaven's armies. The time is coming when everything in your palace, all the treasures stored up by your ancestors until now, will be carried off to Babylon." This was the message of judgment. So how do you put that message together with this message that we read today of a God of pardon and comfort together? How does the God of judgment also become the God of pardon? Well, I have to say it's not just by saying so. Well, your judgment last week, today you're forgiven. I mean, that would be to treat the holiness of God as negotiable and sin as not really significant in any way. In fact, what we read here is it says that your sin has been paid for. You see, that is the element of justice that lies behind the word of comfort. Your sin has been paid for. You see, the provision for sin, to accept that punishment for it, is not a human expedient hoping for the best that it will work, but a divine provision. It is a divine gift. You see, judgment and comfort meet in God. In fact, that for us who are living right now in the 21st century, we know that judgment and comfort meet in the person of Jesus, who takes away our sin and offers the opportunity for comfort. Judgment is not just ignored. There is a price that is paid. It is paid through divine gift. You see, in the very person of God, what we see here is this balance of strength and tenderness, of judgment and comfort coming together. You see, that is true comfort that doesn't ignore the problems, but deals with them. And now this message of this great comfort, this great release, is further reinforced by the rest of the chapter. A chapter that brings real hope and real certainty in the comfort that you and I, as much as the people of Israel in the 6th and 7th century BC, can experience. It is a comfort that endures through many times and through difficult times. A voice shouted, we read in verse 6, "What should I shout?" the question was asked. Well, shout that people are like grass. Their beauty fades as quickly as the flowers in a field. The grass withers and the flowers fade beneath the breath of the Lord. And so it is with people. The grass withers and the flowers fade, but the word of our God stands forever. This is a promise that the comfort of God endures through all circumstances. Other things we promise, we hope that they will fulfill it. Often they let us down. You know what it's like to buy a particular product and it doesn't turn out to be what you expected. It's annoying. You feel like you've wasted money or had your time consumed, but frankly, in the end, it's still only a product. It's more painful, isn't it, when it's a person? Someone maybe that you trust, share part of your soul, open up about your hurt and your experiences and your fears and the things that you're truly hoping for, expecting that they will be there with you, expecting comfort. Instead, maybe they gossip, they let you down. the pain in that circumstance is magnified, isn't it? Well, here the promise is this about God, the one who offers comfort, is that he is the one who will be steadfast in delivering it. You see, when you place your future, all of your hurt in his hands, he will deliver because he's the one who keeps his promises. He's the one who is eternal, the one who can be trusted. The nation of Israel at that time, they had lived their life in exile. They were aware of their own frailties. They were aware of all the human experiences as transient, couldn't be trusted. The flowers might look beautiful, but where would they be tomorrow? And here this word is, well, God is the one enduring reality in this constantly changing world. That is the nature of God, this God of comfort. You know, Israel had sought to put their hope in many places. And they had tried to find hope in all sorts of places to seek comfort, and always been let down. And so Isaiah goes on. In verse 18 he declares, "To whom can you compare God? What image can you find to resemble him?" They had placed their hope in other places, in other people, in other idols. Idols that seem to offer some hope, seem to offer some comfort. But what this is declaring is that idols are useless to compare to God. They're not the equivalent of a Hong Kong knockoff of a Rolex. The Hong Kong knockoff can maybe keep time for a while. What we're talking about here is idols that never deliver anything like the true living God. Haven't you heard, it says in verse 21, don't you understand? Are you deaf to the words of God, the words he gave before the world began? Are you so ignorant? God sits above the circle of the earth. The people below seem like grasshoppers to him. He spreads out the heavens like a curtain and makes his tent from them. He judges the great people of the world and brings them all to nothing. They hardly get started, barely taking root, when he blows on them and they wither. The wind carries them off like chaff. To whom will you compare me? Who is my equal? Asked the Holy One. Look up into the heavens. Who created all the stars? He brings them out like an army, one after another, calling them each by its name. Because of his great power and incomparable strength, not a single one is missing. You see, this is an expression of the wonder of the true, sovereign, eternal God. God is able to do what others cannot. God endures when others fail. God is the one unchanging reality in a world of constant change. And what does that God do? That God invites you. He invites me. He invites all people to experience his true comfort. To know him as the great shepherd. In verse 11 it says, he will feed his flock like a shepherd, carry the lambs in his arms, holding them close to his heart. He will gently lead the mother sheep with their young. You see, this is the God of comfort. The God who in Jesus walked this earth, who experienced the pain and struggle, knew what it was to weep, to be alone. And this is the God who extends that comfort, having experienced those same things as you and me, to each one of us. Finally, at the end of the chapter, it declares this is the same God of comfort that gives strength to all. In verse 29 we read, he gives power to the weak and strength to the powerless. Even young people will become weak and tired. Young men will fall in exhaustion. But those who trust in the Lord will find new strength. They will soar high on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not faint. It's a reminder that for so many of us who try to exist on our own strength and power, focus in a sense in this part on young people, because it's almost like in the days of our youth we believe that we can do anything. We can sustain ourselves. We can give ourselves purpose and energy. We have it all in our hands. We have physically, we have all the potential in the world. And yet we know as we journey through life, we will encounter struggle and fear, pain and hurt, and not be able to endure. There'll be times when we feel extremely weak, when our strength will fade. And here is a reminder from the Lord of heaven and earth that He gives strength to each one of us. He gives courage to face the situations of the day. He gives comfort for when we're hurting. You know, a week or two ago, I read an article in The Age which was focused on how Victorians are struggling to use strategies that have worked in past lockdowns. It was headlined, "I can't be bothered. Victorians battling compounding fatigue of lockdown." Here's some of the points that it made in the article. It said there have been reports of increased family conflict and bullying. Harassment at work spiked significantly in the first week of Victoria's lockdown. A number of psychologists reported this. They said the top three issues we've been seeing is a 40% increase in family conflict, a 55% increase in bullying and harassment allegations at work, an 82% increase in mental health requests for service. When they spoke to a number of experts, some of their responses was this: Victorians had struggled to regain the techniques they used to get through the 2020 lockdowns. They were battling with, and when I read this, it resonated with my heart, and I suspect it resonates with yours. It said that they were battling with compounding and cumulative psychological distress and fatigue. Compounding and cumulative psychological distress and fatigue. You know what that is, don't you? It's the feeling that, yes, we could have kept on going at the start, but and it's not again. It's not again. It's adding another load to my shoulders or another thing to my heart, and I'm just not sure if I can endure it. One psychologist said, what's interesting is that people aren't picking up on strategies they applied last year. They really feel like they're just going back to ground zero. People are just exhausted, this psychologist said. Instead of saying, okay, we've done this before, they're just going, I can't be bothered. I just can't face it. Do you know how that feels? Do you know how that feels today? Maybe you feel like you've reached the end of your tether. You're exhausted. Your reserves are gone. I mean, in our heads, I think we're waiting for a time when we can just say, well, COVID is under control, a vaccine is effective and viable for all. And we're just hoping, almost like we're trying just to hang on and just get through it. I want to say to you today that in the midst of this struggle is the time when we can experience the comfort of God more than ever before. We experience that because we need it as a community more than we ever have. It's a time when we can express the love of Jesus in a greater way because we need that love to be expressed. We need to be able to make that phone call to someone, to be able, in a sense, to be the hands of God, to offer a hug, a listening ear, whatever it may be. But above all, we need to experience that love of God. We need to experience that comfort that gives us peace and certainty for all of life. I mean, the comfort of a hot chocolate, the comfort of an arm around the shoulders, an all-encompassing hug are fantastic. But the comfort that we speak about today from God is on a different level. You see, what it is comfort for our soul, comfort for all of our being. And maybe in the midst of all of us today, there are some of us who are really hurting. I want to say to you, turn to the one who offers tender comfort. If you're living in guilt and shame and fear, I invite you to experience the forgiveness of God, who sacrificed so that you might know what it is to have peace in your soul. For those of you who are in exile, living a long way away from God, maybe you fear His judgment, turn to a loving Father that wraps His arms around you and says, welcome home, the one who smooths the path for you to come towards Him. But for each person here today, for each one who is with us, this is a message not just for your head, but also for your heart. And so I want to invite you to be still with me for a moment. If you feel at ease to do this, maybe you might want to close your eyes, focus your heart, because I want to read these words of comfort for you today. These are words from the living God. These are words from the eternal God, the sovereign God who does not change in a changing world. In Isaiah 40 it says, comfort, comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem. Tell her sad days are gone, her sins are pardoned. Yes, the sovereign Lord is coming in power. He will rule with a powerful arm. See, He brings His reward with Him as He comes. He will feed His flock like a shepherd. He will carry the lambs in His arms, holding them close to His heart. He will gently lead the mother sheep with their young. He gives power to the weak and strength to the powerless. For even young people will become weak and tired. Young men will fall in exhaustion. But those who trust in the Lord will find new strength. They will soar high on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not faint. Let's pray together. For our God, we thank you that in you we find holiness and forgiveness. We find comfort. We thank you that you seek to comfort humanity, to comfort your people. That you invite us to experience the forgiveness that comes from knowing that all of our sin is forgiven. We thank you that you are the God who invites us to come home, to be safe, to be secure. We thank you that you are the eternal, unchanging God, the only constant reality in a world of change. We thank you that we can trust you. We thank you that we can know your comfort personally. You are the one who feeds us like a shepherd. Carry us in your arms. Holds us close to your heart. Our God, we pray particularly today for all who are in need of comfort and strength. Remind each one of us that you are the one who gives power to the weak and strength to the powerless. that when we are exhausted, when we are weary, in you we find new strength. Then we will soar high on wings like eagles. We'll run and not grow weary. We'll walk and not faint. Amen.